Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi, for joining us for these conversations of change. And I'll today read out a small bio that we have of our guest speaker, Mr. Satya Tripathi, the Secretary General of the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet. He's a development economist, lawyer, and a change maker with over 40 years of experience. And Mr. Tripathi is the Chancellor of Kalinga Institute of Social Sciences. And he's also Senior Distinguished Fellow on Innovative Finance at the World Agroforestry Centre. And he has served with UN for more than 2 decades in key positions and has been instrumental in establishing Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility in Indonesia and Sustainable India Finance Facility to leverage private finance for public good. He's previously served on the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Forests. Thank you, Mr. Tripathi. So this conversation is more for us to showcase to our audience about the prominent leaders and professionals in the sector. So what we would like to first understand from you is what does a typical day as a Secretary General of Global Alliance of a Sustainable Planet look like? If you could walk us through the kind of work you do as the Secretary General.
Well, greetings to all of you, and thank you so much for having me. It is wonderful to be in the company of young people, especially because my generation has failed the climate challenge or failed to rise up to the climate challenge spectacularly. We've been talking for 30 years. Depending on what your reference point is, it's more than 50 if you take the World Conference on Sustainable Development in 1972, what is more popularly known as the Stockholm Conference. That's when Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister of India, actually talked about climate change and how bad it will be for the developing world. But we did nothing. And then 20 years later, we had the Rio Conference. And there again, we had the Rio Conventions coming out of the Rio Conference. And that again hasn't really produced the results we would have liked to see. UNFCCC, the Climate Convention, we've been talking for more than 30 years now. And the fact that we are on to the 27th version of the Conference of Parties for that convention speaks volumes, and we have agreed on the precious little. Same with the UN Convention on Desertification, UN Convention on Biodiversity, and the last big COP on biodiversity, the big one this year in Montreal in December next month. But the previous one, which was a big one, because they have these every 2 years, but the big one that I remember last was 2010 in Nagoya, where the Aichi targets came into play, and I attended that, so I remember it vividly. And nothing happened, The Aichi targets were more missed than achieved. And again, spectacularly, because there's nothing really to speak of. Of course, we all get very excited about these COPs because it's a great convening that happens, and of course the UN cannot be blamed for bringing people together. What people do afterwards is on them. It's the same way you are organizing a podcast, right? You're bringing people together, and of course if they lie flat out and tell you stories about what they haven't done or what they intend to do, but internally they never plan to do, which is what we have seen from most countries, corporations, rich people. So I think, that's where the organizations like the Global Alliance for a Sustainable Planet come in. I myself was, till last year, the Assistant Secretary General of the UN, and I was heading the UN's Environment Management Group, which is the consortium of 51 UN agencies, funds, and programs. And we bring about coherence in internal thinking and external advice that the UN gives. So we bring up core issues of concern to the world or to a major group of countries like sandstorms or air pollution. There are many issues that the EMG deals with. But then again, it ultimately falls on countries. What the EMG does is convene and then bring people together, will come up with a report. And what happens to the report, and again, is to the actors afterwards. So in defense of the UN, it does a phenomenal convening, but not much happens after that because the UN is a consensus builder. It has no authority or very tenuous authority, even if you take the Security Council into consideration. Other than the Security Council, there's little authority in any of the organs of the UN, unless, of course, you're talking about the International Court of Justice, where parties must submit themselves to its jurisdiction. And so if you're not a party, you're not submitting yourself to their jurisdiction, it doesn't matter, So that's it's a lot by consensus, and we're at a place in time consensus building is useful but not meaningful because we don't see the results. So that's where organizations like GASP are critical, and that is also one of the reasons that I decided to leave the UN and join the Global Alliance, because I had seen the convening and the power of convening, to be honest, a lot over decades. But we also wanted to see how we can really produce the kind of actions and results that the planet desperately needs to remain a viable living space, not just for humans, but for millions of species. So that's what we do. My day is, we're a global organization, so it spans from anywhere from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. because while it might be a stretch of a day, but for a lot of people that we interact with and work with, it's their normal day and across the planet. So that's in terms of external engagements and all. And then, of course, meetings locally with key actors in New York. New York is the financial hub of the world. So since we catalyze climate finance in a big way, so there's a lot of in-person meetings. Of course, now that COVID is much milder now. And then, of course, the internal management of the organization. We have a team that is, again, spread across the planet. The way we are structured is that we're 10% employees and 90% volunteers. And the 90% volunteers includes myself, who do not receive any compensation whatsoever from the organization. And they actually are very accomplished professionals in their own fields who actually contribute their time and their effort and their imagination to making what GASP is. So that's basically what it is. We have had some moderate success in the last 18 months that I have been responsible for the organization, and we hope to do much more.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Tripathi. It's been humbling to hear that and also very encouraging for us. We take a lot of inspiration from very senior leaders like yourself, and knowing that a lot of these things are happening at international fora is very hopeful for all of us. I mean, you have come with a law background from your education, and when you've been an economist for a long time. And then now you have taken this step to work with the Alliance and also been part of many multilateral agencies. So how has your career journey been, and what learnings have you got throughout this journey, and what has helped you to be in this leadership position today?
So I want to share a little story from an amazing student at the University of British Columbia. I, of course, don't remember her name, but I was, a few years ago, I was a common resource for a lot of schools there, the Sauder School of Business, the School of Public Policy. So I was kind of a fellow in residence, so they invite people like me, and you spend a week or two, and then different schools invite you to share your insights. And so UBC had invited me, and that year, I think it was April 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And so in one of the guest lectures, this girl asked me, she said, "Sir, you have had a very fascinating career. And how did you plan all this? Because it looks so unique and but so accomplished. So how did you plan all this?" And I was completely beaten by that question because I had no answer to it. If you asked me something about subjects I deal with every day, I would have an answer, at least some moderately reasonable answer. But with that question, which is something to which I should have an answer actually, because it's about me, and I had none, So I thought for a second and I told her, the answer is no, I didn't have a plan. If you ask me, did I know 30 years ago I'll be where I am standing here today? No, absolutely no clue. But because you asked the question and I want to give you an honest answer, as I look back, what I see is that I did not have a clue where I'm going next. What I'll do next, I had no long-term plans. And I started as a legal professional. I have always believed, and this is through deep personal experience, that the connection between economics and law is a magical one. Why? Because economics tells you or provides you the tools that you can use to improve prosperity for people, for community, protect the planet, protect the environment, if you want to, of course. The tools are all there. But law is the lubricant that moves society. Because while you understand economics, but law provides a framework for normative behavior. You can have a great economic model where, wealth is being collected through taxes and then it is distributed to poorer people, and poorer people are then uplifted. But if people can steal and people can break down the system, because rich people with a lot of money have power. And so people often talk about caste and religion and community and countries. It's none of those actually. There are rich people and there are poor people. Rich people have power. It's as simple as that. And the entire social model you can break down into very simple metrics: rich people and poor people. So whether you see it through the X lens or Y lens, it's all the same. So how do you make sure that law is used in a way that whatever beneficial economic models you imagine as a policymaker or a policy planner or a politician or a bureaucrat, wherever you find yourself, if that doesn't work, this doesn't work. So I was blessed to have education in both. And so that I have tried to use gainfully in every conversation. So I alternate between being an economist and a lawyer. And sometimes I'm doing both, or sometimes it's pure economist or a pure lawyer when I'm practicing in the Supreme Court of India. So that's what it is that in terms of the essence of what I have done in my career. But going back to the answer to that girl's question, I told her that now that I look back, even though I had no plans for the next job or the next assignment, what I have persistently done throughout my career is that whenever I got an opportunity, no matter how small it is, like in my high school, I once got the opportunity to, by the class teacher, say to keep an eye that the classrooms are clean before they start. So that gave me the discipline. I'll come 30 minutes ahead of the class and then make sure that the room is completely spick and span. And then that earned me the affection of the class teacher because she was quite convinced that this boy is up to the job, and then you get involved in a lot of other things then. Okay, you have some abilities. So little things, but the point I'm trying to make is that you have to do the best of every assignment you find yourself in. And then the next assignment, a better one perhaps, will appear magically. Because even though people like to help people they know, or there's corruption, there's influence, there's all kinds of things going. There's also a part in every human being that admires excellence, that admires professionalism, that admires integrity. So you could either be some rich person's child or a lot of money or some influential community, caste, or whatever in the Indian context, but you could also be just yourself and bring in the excellence you're capable of in every assignment you're at. That will open the doors to the next ladder or the next step. And that's what I have found myself benefiting from all my life. So it's not necessarily how big the job is, how important it is, what it pays you. What is most important is what you do with what you have. And I think that's the career advice I'll give anyone, that, everything you do is important. The person that pulls a rickshaw on the street is important because that's mobility. That's environmentally sustainable mobility. That's from point A to point B, without which none of us can get to wherever we want to go to and do something meaningful. So as important as our job is, but the person that gets us there to be able to accomplish those things is equally important in the ecosystem. So this whole individualistic thinking has to make way to ecosystem-based thinking. And in ecosystem, I'm not talking about environmental ecosystems. It could be an employment ecosystem. It could be any social ecosystem or a community ecosystem. Everybody has a role to play. And if everybody played their roles to perfection, we'll be a very different society.
Thank you so much. That's very, I think it's such a valuable advice to a lot of young people looking for meaningful and purposeful jobs nowadays, because that's the word we hear a lot from a lot of professionals. Shifting to a larger policy question, Mr. Tripathi, like from the work that you do. So India in its position has in the new NDC targets. So it talks about mobilizing a lot of domestic capital and additionally a lot of funds from developing countries and to implement the adaptation goals or mitigation goals. So now, do you think there is an inequality in terms of the divide between global north and global south, and is it increasing? And how can climate finance play a role in it? How can it be more instrumental? And I think we have also come across GASP collaborating with Green Generation Fund and subnational finance that's going to be talked about in COP27. I would like to hear your views on that.
Well, so GASP has roughly 200 member organizations, and the number is growing. So Green Generation Fund is one of them. The Subnational Climate Fund is one of them. The Global Fund on Coral Reefs is one of them. But let me go back a little to what countries like India are facing. Now, the challenge is that India is a massive country, 1.4 billion people, 18% of the population of the world, only 4% of the freshwater resources. And that's really a big challenge, So if you look at Canada, Canada has roughly 20% of the world's water resources, with literally negligible percentage in population terms, So that's one challenge. The other challenge is air pollution. India has 21 of the worst 30 top polluted cities in the world. Flood index, India is number one, a flood risk index. And one could go on and on and on. So the challenge for countries like India is not so much to cater to what the world needs in terms of mitigation goals, but rather to focus about adaptation. Because adaptation is about people. It's about species, it's about lives, it's about livelihoods. And if you adapt well, you will mitigate well as well. To give you an example, in India, about 25% of the emissions, the current emissions are roughly about 3 billion tons a year. and 25% of the emissions are agriculture related. So if you were to convert to natural farming or regenerative agriculture, that is adaptation. It's not mitigation, it's adaptation, because it's clean food for poor people. Because if everybody's growing clean food, they don't have to pay 3 times the cost to buy organic stuff from all the supermarkets. And that creates access to healthy food for the entire population, which then gets them to live their life to the fullest of their potentials, and not be bogged down by the 1,000 ailments throughout their life cycle without any resources. That is one of the biggest challenges to poor people, not just in India, but the entire world, including the developed world, is that what happens if you fall sick? Because you stop earning, and then whatever little reserves you have vanishes very quickly. And so that's the challenge. We had a time, for example, India, I mean, of course, how good was the healthcare system is debatable, but we had no private hospitals, almost none. So then what happened was that rich people and poor people went to the same hospitals. So the hospital system worked much better because rich people had a stake in it. Now with the inflow of big private hospitals, rich people don't go to government hospitals anymore. It doesn't matter to them. So if you see a precipitous drop in standards in government hospitals across the developing world, that is because of the spread of private healthcare. Not to suggest that private healthcare is bad, but the point is the power equation changes. Then people who matter aren't interested in where poor people go, other than as a policy intervention. Okay, let's put 2% into healthcare. People need something and those kind of thing, but not because their lives also depend on it. And we saw that during COVID playing out across the planet, not just in India. So the point is that you cannot tell India, a country of 1.4 billion people, whose per capita carbon footprint is 1.9 tons, roughly, whereas the global ideal footprint to which everybody needs to get to for us to be a viable planet is 2.1 tons. So how does the Prime Minister of India go and sell it to his population that the global ideal is 2.1, you guys are at 1.9, but you still need to do more? How do you sell that? Especially when the United States, the carbon footprint is 16 tons per capita. And throughout the developed world, the number is anywhere between, even very responsible countries have 6 to 8 tons per capita. Countries that have done extremely well in environmental protection and climate mitigation. So that's the challenge for a politician, that you cannot really sell this to anybody with half a brain, that you're at 1.9, the ideal is 2.1, you still need to eat less or wear less or be more responsible. It's very difficult. So that's an argument you can't make. But the argument you need to make, and you must make, is that we have 21 of the worst 30 polluted cities in the world. So we have to stop our people from breathing in this polluted air, because India itself loses 1.7 million people every year, directly attributable to air pollution. And Dalberg recently published a study a few months ago in partnership with the government of India that identifies the loss to the national economy at $95 billion per year from air pollution alone. And so there are those challenges. There are challenges like we have 200 small and medium ports across our 7,200 kilometer coastline that is at severe risk from sea level rise and storm surges, tidal waves as sea waters rise. Whether we contributed to the problem or not, we have to adapt. India has 160 million hectares of agricultural land. And if you add the land that is fallow, it's another 10 million. So it's about 170 million hectares of land that is under cultivation in some form or shape. So if that can become sustainable and low input, high output agriculture. Currently, it is high output, low input, high input, low output. So if you flip that, and we've seen in Andhra Pradesh and other states that are practicing regenerative agriculture, that it is indeed possible. And so if you do that, that equation changes dramatically. And so India needs to, because then you have significant gains to public health, you have prosperity at the grassroots, you have people getting access to clean food, the ecosystems heal, the water tables rise. So in every possible way, India, it can be India's century. If you take care of your own environment and your own ecosystems, excuse me. And so that is why India needs to act for adaptation. And as I was saying in the beginning, if your 25% of your emissions are from agriculture, that's 750 million tons. So if you can get that to maybe 20% of the current numbers, you can't make it zero because you'll still have some inputs. But even if it's at 20%, you're talking about creating a carbon reduction and sequestration market, because then that number can be double. So let's say you save 600 million tons of CO2 emissions from reduction credits and from the practices that you're doing now and you won't do. And another similar number from sequestration credits, because when you stop destroying the microbes and the subsoil ecosystems, when they come back to life, you will have carbon being sequestered with increased moisture, with around the year mulching, preventing soil erosion, keeping a green cover, bringing back trees to the agricultural landscapes. The whole equation changes. So India could actually possibly have 1 billion tons of carbon credits just from agriculture to provide to the rest of the world, who will be desperately needing offsets in the coming years. So, so there's a lot of possibilities for India. And so India, and I'm so glad that the Honorable Environment Minister, whom I know well, Mr. Yadav, has made this, he spoke recently and he put this forward as the cornerstone of India's climate policy and climate engagement, that we're going to focus big time on adaptation. And he's right on the money. Adaptation is key, because with adaptation, you will also get mitigation, but not mitigation because somebody else can keep emitting as much as they want to, while we need to behave, quote unquote, better by their standards. But we do something because it's important for our people, for our rivers, for our mountains, for our landscapes, and our country. And in the process, if somebody benefits, more power to them. But we must benefit first in this process. And that's why I think the renewed emphasis on adaptation in the revised NDCs that India put forward is very welcome.
So the natural farming initiative in Andhra Pradesh that was started a few years back, and I had the privilege to see that directly interacting with some farmers, even a couple of years back when I was on the field. So it's an excellent initiative. And do you think ahead of COP27, is the international community ready to hold a dialogue on this kind of regenerative agricultural practices and how it's going to help not only India, but the whole world going ahead in the adaptation? And how do you think India is playing the role in the forefront, promoting this whole model for the world?
Well, I think this is a very important data set that is worth looking at. In the previous COPs, climate COPs, there has never been a food pavilion. This time there are 4. So concerns about the food system and concerns about the unsustainable agriculture that we've been practicing for decades now is greater than ever. And so there will be a lot of conversation happening at the COP. But we still are at a time where people think that the carbon challenge can be met by finding technology. So to give you an example, there's a group of companies now pursuing, and they're making big headway in terms of raising finance from the capital markets, from angel investors, from all kinds of venture capital funds in the billions, right? And what do? They basically put up a machine that sucks air from the atmosphere, and then through a heat transfer mechanism. So there's a chamber with a filter, and that's a cold chamber. So your air goes in, and the carbon molecules freeze faster than the other ones. So they basically traps them in the filter, and then the filter moves to a warmer chamber where it gets released again, and then it is captured, then it's mixed with water, and then you push it down a shaft to a volcanic rock that is porous, and then this CO2 mixed with water gets into those rock forms and solidifies. And so it turns to stone. So science-wise, it's great. So it does, you can quantify how much carbon, you can guarantee that it is captured and it's gone underground. So it's never going to come out that easily. And in any case, it's turned to stone. So it's not even in a liquid form or anything. And they are currently on their website. If you look at Climeworks, is one of the leading companies in that space. They're selling it for €1,000 a ton. Whereas the farmer that toils the ground, breaking his back to feed us, even if they sequester some carbon, they get $20 for it. That's the price in the market, $20 to $22. So what is carbon? Going back to economics 101, money is what money does. Money can be a great power for good. It can be a great power for evil. We've seen that throughout the march of history. Now we're at a time and place where carbon has the same meaning. So carbon is what carbon does. Are we going to spend money on carbon that is mindless? Yes, scientifically proven to be carbon, and it has been withdrawn. You've reduced that much carbon in from the atmosphere, but what good does it do other than the global warming part? And here it brings back the microbes, it brings back the bees and birds, it saves species, it produces all kinds of mitigation, including once you have trees in the agricultural landscape, that has its own benefits. The water table improves, so desertification will be prevented, and one could go on and on in terms of all the benefits, and everything has an attached carbon value. So something that is literally saving us alongside also being the same scientific quantity of carbon. Why wouldn't you pay a little more for that? To celebrate the hard work being done by the farmer in switching from synthetic chemical farming to a bioinoculation based system of agriculture, which is now proven to be very effective. If you just take the case of Andhra Pradesh alone, a program that we have supported since 2017, it's an extraordinary program. They're already at 1 million farmers that have been weaned away from synthetic chemical agriculture to zero chemical farming. And that number is growing, and in a few years, they'll get to 6 million, inspired by what they have done. Now there's a lot of national program, on Prakritik Krishi and all kinds of things. So if we were mindful of what carbon can do, we would really put our heads together, whether at the COP or afterwards, and see how can we really reward the farmer for something that has 100 other benefits other than being carbon as well. So it is no less carbon compared to the carbon that comes out of the Climeworks suction mechanism and trapping the molecules and mixing it with water and turning it into stone. It's the same carbon in scientific terms. So, but this does 100 more things that are actually beneficial to the humans. And so we need to recognize these things and not be lost in translation. And there are different kinds of carbon. While the scientific measure remains the same, but what we talk about blue carbon. Why is blue carbon important? It is important because 2 out of every 3 breaths we take comes out of the ocean. The oceans produce 70% of the world's oxygen. That is why blue carbon is important, because it keeps us breathing. So that's the thing, and I sincerely hope we ourselves will be having a lot of conversations. GASP is hosting in the Blue Zone a conversation around regenerative agriculture, and we have some very accomplished speakers joining us, and so we'll keep the focus on that, but we are a small player. The conversation has to be at a much bigger scale between governments and all, and Andhra Pradesh now is doing a phenomenal job. They have been very welcoming. We have seen cabinet ministers visiting from Indonesia to see how they can replicate this. A lot of people, the Agroecology Fund recently hosted a big group, and they have now published a study. We recently had Dr. Pawan Sukhdev visiting to present the tea agri-food study, and he's technically the Nobel laureate in environment, because it's the Tyler Prize winner, which is also known as the Nobel for Environment. So we have some very gifted thought leaders coming to Andhra Pradesh and undertaking studies. We have our own Sustainable India Finance Facility team based out of Guntur, and they do some serious studies themselves, and some of them actually have led to bigger conversations. It is our team working, of course, with the government that actually found out that there's 50% savings on water. And then so that then has led to much bigger studies, and now everybody's looking at it very carefully, that if it indeed saves 50% water, then this is amazing. It can actually save the country's landscapes and water tables. So, so there are all these possibilities, but sometimes it's fragmented and diffused, so it doesn't hold the attention the same way a mechanical object that sucks air and turns into something, and then you show a piece of stone, hey, you know what? I turned that carbon into stone. It all looks magical. But what is truly magical is that woman farmer who, apart from doing all the wonderful things she does for her family, also is spending 10 to 12 hours in the field to keep the rest of the planet fed and nourished. That's what needs to be recognized and respected.
Very true, Mr. Tripathi. And do you see any kind of a dialogue or narrative happening around the talent and the kind of professionals required for the climate action space? What's your take on that in terms of are we ready as a world with enough talent and professionals to reach our goals? Is that even a narrative we should be talking about?
Well, the talent is certainly there. The ideas are certainly there. It is the motivation that is lacking. And politicians, unfortunately, have to deal with, and I am not criticizing them, I'm just speaking actually for them, in the sense that they have to deal with the political cycle. In the United States here, every 2 years there's an election for their Congress. And of course, every 4 years, the presidential elections and all, but technically there's an election cycle every 2 years. So whether your election is in 4 years or as is the case in the Senate in 6 years, or in the House of Representatives, which is 2 years, it doesn't matter. You have to be, as a party, you have to be worried about elections every 2 years. As an individual, maybe, the cycles are different for different positions, but as a party, you are facing elections every 2 years. And every policy you make has a 2-year life cycle. You might, now there is every indication that the Democrats might lose the Congress, and the voting is happening today. And so this is a challenge everywhere, every country, whatever you do. And then we've seen that in Australia, we've seen that in the UK, we have seen that in the US, and a lot of very significant countries, and also in Canada, to some extent, not as bad as in Australia, is that once a government changes, the entire climate policy changes. And then that is a very bad thing. Thankfully, Brazil now got a president-elect who is a climate champion. So it's like one step forward, two steps backward. That keeps happening. So notwithstanding the fact that you have a lot of climate champions, a lot of ideas, a lot of very inspiring young people that are coming up with great ideas, but at the end of the day, it doesn't work because we don't speak as one community. The world doesn't speak as one. And if we did that, and we have framed it as global warming and climate change, we should have framed it as public health. We should have framed it as ecosystem health. And the same way we did with the Montreal Protocol, the Ozone Convention. What is it? It's basically when we found out that a lot of people are going to die from skin cancer if the ozone hole is not plugged, we brought together the best scientific minds into the room and had a conversation between scientists. We found a solution. We mainstreamed that into our respective budgets, our laws, bylaws, regulations, and all. And now in 35 years' time, we've actually managed to plug that hole. So that's the kind of action that is required in the climate space as well, which is not happening at this time. And people often talk about 2 degrees, 1.5 degrees, 3.5 degrees, all kinds of these numbers. It is important for your audience to know that the Paris Agreement, if fully implemented, and at this time there is very little evidence of that, if the Paris Agreement completely gets implemented, that will still be 3.2 degrees of global warming. Not 2 degrees, not 1.5 degrees. The 2 degrees that is mentioned in the Paris Agreement is an ambition. What is promised is 3.2 degrees. And we are already, all these numbers were by the turn of the century, by 2100. That's the timeline we are talking about, right? We are already at 1.3 degrees of global warming. So we are literally in cosmic time scale, we are inches away from getting to 1.5 or 2 degrees, at which time the entire the climate and the ecosystem breakdown will be catastrophic. We're already seeing that. People were worried about pandemics where pathogens jump from animals to humans. A study that came out recently tells us that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic, because bacteria that has been frozen for millions of years is finally emerging with the melting of glacial ice. And as that happens, once it is liquid, water travels everywhere on the planet. And so these bacteria that have been dormant for millions of years will find new hosts, spawning new pandemics that we can't even manage. With one pandemic, the entire economic system of the world was upended, literally. We barely survived. What if there are multiple pandemics happening? So we really need to see the problem for what it is and not keep talking about it, but rather acting on the challenge, finding the solutions, getting resources to the people, the innovators, the inventors, and to the countries that need it the most, and produce the kind of results that'll save us. And we need to think very selfishly. Even if you're not thinking about other species, even if you're not thinking about the planet, you don't need to, because the planet will be fine once we are gone. But we should think about ourselves and what it does to the entire beautiful world, as we call it, that we have built for ourselves. It will disintegrate right in front of our eyes. Earlier, I used to think that not in my lifetime. But now I am 100% certain it is going to happen in my lifetime.
To be honest, it brings a lot of anxiety and fear.
These are facts. People often tell me these are scary things. I said, these are not. I'm not the scientist. These are facts. So you can, I was speaking at a foreign policy hosted event in New York during the New York Climate Week, and I was telling the editor-in-chief, Ravi Agrawal, so Ravi was telling Satya, you paint a very pessimistic picture. And I said, would you rather I lie? So the truth is pessimistic. Yeah. We need to get a life, really. The truth is the truth. There's nothing pessimistic or optimistic about it. Facts are facts. The sun rises in the east is a fact. So if that is a problem for some people, then those people need to deal with it rather than getting worried about people that say, hey, the sun is rising in the east. So that's the challenge, because we have been telling stories for so long that the facts look scary. It is time actually we sit up, we own our failings, and we tell it as it is, because that's when people will demand action from their governments. Everybody keeps fudging. Everybody keeps being nice to each other. Oh, you can't scare people. It's not a good thing. People already have enough anxiety. Well, you know what? Every passing day that we don't act, let me give you an example. In 2003, if we had acted in the way that we are talking about now, and we're still not acting, but at least we are talking. In 2003, if we had acted, we needed to reduce our emissions by only 3% every year. And then we'll be fine. We did nothing. Now, we need to reduce it more than 7% every year. And if we still don't act, and now the new NDCs came out, you talked about India's NDCs, a lot of other countries have come out. The synthesis report has also come out. What is it telling us? That with all the revised commitments, the emissions reduction will be less than 1% by 2030. Whereas we actually need to reduce our emissions by 47% by 2030 to remain a viable planet. And all the countries together have put up, you should check out the emissions gap report of my former organization, UNEP, that just came out, this year's emissions gap report. It's a flagship report that UNEP publishes every year to bring back focus on where we are. Scary, it's under 1%. That is the additional commitment that countries have put up in light of the challenge that we really need to almost get to half of our emissions, current emissions by 2030 to remain viable. So that's what it is.
True, yeah. That brings us to the last question I have, which is, it's an enormous responsibility to be able to be at that stage and talking about these and putting the facts out there and dealing with such a responsibility on your shoulders. So how do you find yourself balancing between your work and life, and how do you unwind from this work? You could share a little about that as well.
Well, I think, for your audience, it's important to know that if you love what you do, you don't have to work a single day in your life. So technically, I don't work. So I love what I do. So I enjoy every bit of it. So absolutely no tiredness, no grudge. Oh, I have to work so much. No, I get to do what I do. And so I'm blessed in a way that I get to do what I do, and it gives me so much joy. As far as I'm concerned, I'm 100% dedicated to being a small linchpin in a big wheel, but a linchpin. That's what GASP does. We do catalytic stuff. We are a free service for anybody that approaches us, and we help them. It costs nobody anything. And I say this publicly, often like a broken record, for the simple reason that we deal with a lot of partners in the ecosystem. I just want to make sure that nobody is taking someone else for a ride. Because sometimes it happens, you might be doing things for free. If people don't know it, then your next point of contact is telling their next point of contact, oh, you know what, we really need money and this and that and all, and you never know about it. So that is why I say this everywhere, so that there is no confusion in anybody's mind that we are a free service. So anybody that approaches us gets supported for free. In the last 18 months that I have been a part of this great organization, we've already produced more than $3 billion of climate investments in dealing with very serious challenges to people and planet. So if we can do that, it is certainly possible, and everybody can do that. And so there's no question of work-life balance anymore, because now our life depends on it. So this is the work we need to do to find that balance in our lives that keeps us alive and breathing, not happy and joyful. Yes, that's also helpful, but this is more a question of staying alive and breathing, and clean air and being able to consume uncontaminated water, and getting prosperity to people at the bottom of the pyramid. So that's what it is about. So there's so much life in it and so much joy. And if you call it work, then this is amazing work.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And we end our podcast here. Thank you so much for participating. And we must also thank Snigdha, who's with us today. She's stationed at Guntur, working in the SIFF facility. And she has put us in touch with your office. And we look forward as Climate Asia team to align with the goals and targets that GASP has set for themselves and for the world. And we continue to be in touch with you, and we look forward to more of your work, Mr. Tripathi. Thank you so much for taking our time.
Thank you. Thank you.